Hey, this is RockMan. Welcome back to RockMan Reads, a Freakin Book, where DK left off. Today I'll be reading chapters 36 through 38 of Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 36. Kate laid out a very simple plan to boost me into the ranks of Bolt Squadron, but we ran into some unexpected complications over the next several months. So once again, he must have spent several months at the Jedi Academy and several months doing this undercover with these bad guys. I swear, it's from the time Mirax disappeared to now, I swear it's been a year. The first and most frustrating was the paucity of challenging missions for us. While the Invidious made a number of forays out, the survivors weren't always chosen to accompany Tavira's task force. The Red Nova crew, the Laser Lords, the Fast Blast crew, Rise Star's Raiders, the Black Star Pirates, and even Shala the Hutt's gang got their chances to go on missions. Rotating the forces kept them all sharp and let everyone know they were not indispensable. Even when the survivors were sent out, Rock Squadron didn't always go on the mission. Except when Tavira called for the Bolt specifically, Niv chose among us by lot. Rock Squadron got roughly one Invid mission per month. On our other missions, we flew cover for smaller ships, much in the same way the Red Nova's people had flown cover for the Booty Full. Rogue Squadron never jumped us, but on one of our Invid missions, the Invidious vanished from the system shortly after arrival. We found ourselves fighting with a fighter group of Y-Wings and homegrown uglies in that engagement and lost 2 pilots from one flight, including Captain Keck. If there had been New Republic capital ships waiting at the edge of the system, I saw no evidence of them, nor was there any trace in the sensor data I pulled from the backstab. After vanquishing the local fighters, we strafed a settlement and looted some warehouses, but even with a couple of bulging shuttles, the raid had hardly seemed worth it. It was only later, when Rock Squadron elected me captain, that I learned from Jacob Niv that the Invidious had headed out because another Invid operation had run into trouble, and Tavira wanted to ambush the ambushers. The threat to us had not been dire enough to cause her to stick around, and I couldn't disagree. In the other situation, 3 New Republic corvettes had engaged some Invid freighters and fighters, then withdrawn when the Invidious showed up. It took a couple of weeks, but I learned details on that other operation. Shala's gang had been in position to take off a spice shipment in the Kessel system when the New Republic ships had appeared. They had a running light fight for 20 minutes, during which one of the Shala's freighters took damage, lost maneuvering, and sailed off to be sucked into the Maw, the big black hole near Kessel. At roughly that point in the battle, the Invidious arrived and drove the New Republic ships away, all but killing the Freedom of Celeste. This rescue increased the fame of the Invidious and general sense of immortality among the crews, but it sent a chill down my spine. It struck me as unlikely that the New Republic would send 3 corvettes into a system where they expected to run into the Invidious. 3 corvettes wouldn't be unusual for a patrol, especially with old imps like Pterodok or Harsk or Admiral Dala still hyping around. My gut told me the corvettes had happened on Shala's people by accident. That's not so terrifying, but the implication of the Invidious getting there in time to save Shala was. The flank speed time from the system where we were to Kessel was 18 hours, and that was if the astrogator wanted to pull a solo and skirt the fringes of the Maw. That meant that somehow Admiral Tavira knew of a chance meeting 18 hours in advance and hustled her ship along to get her there. The fact that it would have been just as easy to open a HoloNet connection with Shala and warn him off the Kessel run meant that Tavira clearly liked the idea of a split-second rescue. Her solution definitely enhanced her reputation among us, and had to have been that much more galling to the New Republic. The question was, however, how did she know the trouble would be taking place 18 hours in the future? There seemed only one answer to me. The advisor Exar Kun had showed me near her was adept in using the Force, and warned her of Shala's peril. I'd sensed no overt Force usage from the Invidious, but I was keeping myself as shut down on missions as I'd been when approaching Exar Kun's temple, so it wasn't much of a surprise that I wasn't picking anything up. Under my leadership, with Timzer heading up 3 Flight and Kate in charge of 2 Flight, Rock Squadron got good. We weren't the Bolts, but we weren't so far behind them that they should have felt complacent. I tightened up our training methods and broke pilots of bad habits. By making them better, I increased my chances of attracting Tavira's notice, and that brought me closer to finding and freeing Mirax. The primary advantage the Bolts had over us was in the area of combat hours, but our average was quickly approaching theirs. They tended to get included in more Invid missions, which carried a lot of prestige, but the Invid's presence often stopped opposition before it started. The resulting lack of fatalities among the Bolts meant my avenue to that path effectively remained blocked. Blocked, that was, until the Zafel mission. Zafel, a world in the Kanshin sector, served the Kuat drive yards as a major manufacturer of starship hyperdrives. Grand Admiral Thawne targeted the world for the same reason Tavira hit it. Ready-made hyperdrives were a boon to anyone who could get away with them. Because of her connections within the Imperial community, Tavira could find countless warlords willing to purchase them and make them beholden to her at the same time. I assumed that the latter reason was even more of a motivator than the former. The seriousness of the assault was underscored by Admiral Tavira specifying Bolt, Hawk, and Rock squadrons from the survivors, and allowing us to come up to the Invidious and ship aboard the Star Destroyer for the run-in at the world. Corvettes and bulk cruisers accompanied us in a huge task force, with Slash Squadron covering Backstab, and the other crews from Crocus similarly having fighter cover. The grouping of ships was the largest task force I had ever seen while with the Invids, and underscored how serious Tavira was about staging this raid. The 3 survivor squadrons aboard the Invidious were each paired with one of the Invidious's native clutch squadrons. Their pilots and ours eyed each other suspiciously. I noticed on a couple of them the red sleeves that marked them as once having served in the 181st Imperial Fighter Group, but nothing else indicated these pilots were anything special. All of us hoped for a chance to prove ourselves against them, though chances were that anyone with access to a fighter on Jafel would keep it on the ground. I wasn't really looking forward to the raid for 2 reasons. The first was that Jafel had been so badly polluted by the Kuat drive yards factories that even visiting could be painful. Breather masks and protective clothing were recommended, and while my clutch pilot's outfit might suffice, spending time down on that hot rock in my environmental gear did not sound like fun. While I had no intention of getting shot down or crashing, when looking at a potential survival situation, I hate the idea of having to battle a world for my life. The second reason was one that plagued me with each mission, and had been a concern even back during undercover operations with Corsac. I had to ask myself where I drew the line in what I was going to do to fit in with the Invids. In a Corsac undercover operation, the lines of responsibility were very clear. I could participate in crimes against property, but once any person was under the threat of death or serious bodily injury, my duty to protect them kicked in. Here with the pirates, things were nowhere near so clear or clean. I encouraged my squadron to use ion cannons, noting that hardware we didn't destroy we could always haul back to Crocus. I'd even had 2 headhunters with hyperdrives salvaged from one raid, and was having my unit's tech looking into finding a way to mount the drive on my clutch. The better pilots among my people followed my lead, but I still had 2 or 3 who went for lasers and dogfights. On ground attack missions, I stressed minimizing attacks on civilian targets. Yeah, a refueling station might blow up really pretty, and might even set half a city on fire, but that's not the object here. I shook my head in a briefing session. Look, you can kill a woolly nerf and make a coat out of its skin, or you can shear the beast's coat and come back year after year for more wool. We play this right, 6 months from now we show up in the system, send a list of demands, and they'll freighter the loot out to us. Most of my pilots seemed to get the message, and only a couple of times did we have to run some of the other Invids away from our zones of control. Once I caught Remart poaching on a lonely stretch of roadway, just blasting land speeders for the simple pleasure he found in murder. I put an ion bolt into his clutch and commed to Captain Gert to recall him, which she did. I also attached his portion of the loot from the raid and had it sent to the families of the people he'd killed as recompense, and I vowed I'd bring him to justice for their murders when all was said and done. 15 minutes prior to reversion to real space, we got the orders to get into our clutches. I mounted up, powered up, and collected reports from my pilots. I relayed them to Captain Gert, who was acting as the commander of Survivor Group. Invidious Group consisted of their Blade, Saber, and Pike squadrons, with Rock and Pike squadrons being paired up for missions. I felt a little jolt run through my ship as we reverted 7 seconds early. Before I could figure out what had happened, Launch Control gave us immediate clearance to launch, which we did. I rolled out to port and headed toward my rendezvous position. My mouth went dry, and I knew it was from more than sympathy for the gray, thick-aired world below me. We'd come out of hyperspace early because an interdictor cruiser hung in space over Jafel. In formation with it were a Mon Calamari star cruiser and a Victory-class Mark II star destroyer. A host of smaller ships surrounded the 3 capital ships, including a number of assault shuttles that I assumed were conveying troops to the planet below. The presence of the interdictor meant the Invidious couldn't flee, and already the New Republic ships had begun to orient themselves for battle. Worse yet, to my mind, were the swarms of fighters beginning runs at us. Gigs of data poured over my screens. There had to be at least 2 squadrons of Y-Wings and A-Wings out there. I spotted other ships that had to be B-Wings. They, along with the A-Wings, moved toward our escorts like the backstab, and the only reason they would leave the clutches to the Y-Wings was if the Y-Wings had help. Then I saw them and my heart sank. I keyed the comm unit. We have serious trouble here, Invidious. You have fighters coming up from Jafel. It will be impossible for them to get through our fighter screen, Rock Lead. Don't say impossible. I punched up a data feed and sent it along to the Invidious. That's Rogue Squadron. And impossible is their stock in trade. Chapter 37. I punched up the Survivor's tactical frequency. This is Rock Lead. Stay clear of the X-Wings. Go after the Y-Wings and use your ion cannons. Leave them dead in space, but the pilots able to squawk. Captain Gert came back quickly. Why not kill them? We're evenly matched here, and the only way we win is by getting away. We leave pilots drifting, the reps will pick them up. Invid can come back out of the grav well and be ready to run. The reps will see it as a win, and we'll get out of here. Vape 'em all, Sassru's voice rang with bravado. I'm not afraid of any rep pilots. Fine, you take the rogues. Good luck. I glanced down at my monitor. We're a minute to contact, Captain. Your call. Gert waited for a moment, then issued her orders. Target Y-Wings, use ion cannons only. Run on some of the assault shuttles too. Let Tavira's folks pick up the X-Wings. I dialed the comm unit down to Rock Squadron's tactical frequency. Shock the wishbones, stay clear of the pointers, leave the slims and crosses alone. Call for help and we'll get through this. There were 1,000 other things I wanted to say, but I had 30 seconds to contact and I needed to try something first. Since leaving the Jedi Academy, I had not opened myself to the Force in any serious way. I knew if Tavira's advisors were Force-sensitive, I could be exposing myself, but I chanced it. I pushed my smear of responsibility forward, toward the incoming fighters. I isolated the X-Wings, then sought among them. I found Colonel Kelchu and pushed an image into his mind. I fed him the image of a clutch melting into the shape of an X-Wing with my X-Wing's markings on it. I had no idea what he would make of that vision, and I couldn't hold it for more than a second, but I hoped it meant he knew I was out here. I let him go, allowing us both time to recover before the battle joined, and then I flew into the thick of it. Above us and around us, the capital ships exchanged fire. Though the New Republic had 3 smaller ships present, their combined firepower fairly evenly matched that of the Invidious. Red and green turbolaser beams made space an obstacle course, where one wrong turn meant oblivion. Shots that did make it through the wheeling and diving fighter cloud struck the other capital ships, but shields seemed to be holding, except in the case of the smaller ships. Both sides seemed to be targeting smaller ships with their ion cannons, trying to eliminate annoyances while leaving themselves scraps to pick up after the battle. Rock Squadron rolled into a light fight with an eager and aggressive Y-Wing squadron. Clutches were faster than wishbones, but these bone pilots weren't bad. I nailed my first one on a high-angle deflection shot that caught it in an engine nacelle. The bone rolled immediately to starboard, causing me to roll that way as well. I popped my throttle off, reverse thrust, and dropped it back on, anticipating a similar move by my foe. He realized that I'd outguessed him after only a second or two and started a full throttle climb. I hit the rudder, swung my nose around to port, and hit him a second time right behind the cockpit. His shields collapsed, and the ship continued on, his climb carrying him away from Jaffel. I throttled up and rolled into a dive that vectored me in on the tail of a bone, trying to light up one of my clutches. I've got him 5, brake port. Careful, lead. Blue ion bolts flashed back at me from the bone's cockpit, splashing against my forward shield. I rolled right and came down, using the bone's own engine to sell as cover, then pumped more engine energy to my shield. Heads up, Rocks. Some of these bones are deuces and have a gunner in back controlling that ion cannon. Staying low, I cranked the throttle up, then climbed and triggered a shot into the Y-wing. The pilot had begun to roll the bone to give the gunner a shot at me, but I hit him first. Rolling out to port and applying some rudder, I kept him in my sights and shot again. I only got a partial hit, which took his aft shields down, but kept him flying. Another ion bolt nailed the bone in the tail, leaving it spiraling through space. I saw Kate's clutch go shooting past and calmed a quick thanks to her. She replied with a yip. Then I found myself flying out the other side of the battle and a bit closer to the New Republic capital ships than I had any desire to be. I rolled and dove, then turned and climbed, braking as many planes as I could and holding no path longer than a second or two. None of the capital ships took a shot at me. They had bigger prey to shoot at, but I didn't want to make myself an easy target to tempt them. I wasn't easy to hit, which is why, I suppose, I attracted Rogue Squadron's attention. On a very basic level, I found this attention very flattering. My peers had decided I was a worthy opponent, and since they didn't know who I was, it was the sort of honest evaluation that was only possible in an anonymous situation. The problem I had with it, of course, was that their method of showing their appreciation for my skills could likely get me killed. This would not do, but I was stuck. While I could dial up their comm frequencies, I wouldn't know the encryption codes. If they reached me on a widecast, every other ship in the fleet could pick it up, and that wouldn't do me much good either. I couldn't even take time to concentrate and use the Force to project another message to Tycho, since locating him and making contact and all that would take every bit of the concentration I needed to stay alive. I was stuck, but not without options. When the Force is your ally, you are never without options. I kept my hand light on the stick and expanded my sphere of responsibility. Everything outside my cockpit seemed completely chaotic, a kaleidoscope of possibility and probability that shifted every nanosecond. Energy filled the void, traveling back and forth between the big ships, while smaller bolts sprayed out in all directions. Proton torpedoes and concussion missiles raced at targets as if homing in on the fear of those who had been targeted. Elation and pain, hope and terror, anger and determination all swirled about. Where they intersected, I could hear death screams or whispered affirmations of survival. Out of all of this, I sorted the feelings directed toward me, the mental energies concentrated on my clutch. As they hardened, as they seemed to come to a point, as if light sliding along the narrow blade of a knife, I knew to juke right or left, up or down. In response, I'd feel shock and anger or disbelief, then a gathering of concentration again. Gavin dropped in behind me, and I read him like data streaming across a wide-screen data pad. As he prepared to blast me, I cut my throttle out, dove, then hauled back on the stick and climbed. I rolled to starboard since I knew he favored that side, and cruised upright on his tail. I triggered one ion burst, then rolled to port and dove away from him. Oral came next and proved tougher than I would have expected. He had always been a good pilot and had gotten much better during his time with the squadron, but I'd always had an edge over him in simulations. I wasn't certain why, but as he splashed laser light over my aft shield, I began to wonder if it wasn't because he had some mental block against shooting me up in exercises. Regardless, he hung with me like a neck with its teeth sunk into a hut's tail, and I had serious trouble reading his intent to fire. If I can't anticipate what he's doing, I have to make him anticipate what I'm doing. I juked to starboard, letting the ship drift sideways, then dove and rolled to port. I bounced the clutch up and down a couple of times, then juked to starboard, dove and rode out to port. I tossed in some more random drift, then repeated the pattern the third time. The impressions I got from Oral, while still inscrutable to me, changed, and I knew he had the pattern. 10 seconds later, I drifted right and dove. I snap-rolled 90 degrees to port as if beginning my lazy roll, then hauled back on the stick and popped my throttle off. Oral had begun his own roll to the left, arrowing in toward where I should have been, exposing his ship's belly to me. I hit him with one solid ion blast, Then another pilot's blast nailed him and his ship went dead. Got him for you, Lead, Timser announced. No need to thank me. I wasn't going to. Oral's dead ship had been pointed at Jaffel when it got hit, and with no control, he'd smash into the atmosphere and be crushed. He had less than a minute until impact, and I could do nothing to save him. I rolled and watched his stricken ship continuing a slow spiral to what would be Oral's death. If only I could use telekinesis to deflect his ship into an orbit. Then his cockpit canopy exploded, and Oral's command chair shot out. A second later, his R2 unit similarly ejected from the dying X-Wing. The ejection rocket carried him off toward the interdictor, though it would burn out long before it ever got there. Still, he's safe. A new presence focused itself on me, and I knew I was in serious trouble. Even without using the Force, there are some people who have minds so slow that you can almost hear synapses firing at a torpid pace. Others are so quick-witted you end up marveling at connections they make, but only after the 5 or 10 minutes it takes you to unravel their thought processes. And then there are people whose minds move in multiple dimensions, all at light speed, leaving you unable to even begin to guess how their minds work. Tycho Kelchu had such a mind, but what impressed me about him was not the speed with which he thought, but the cool deliberation that defined the way he thought. When he picked me up as a target, I didn't feel the narrowing blade the way I had with Gavin. Instead, Tycho had my ship all boxed up, and second by second shrank that box, eliminating extraneous data, until my ship and a little box he had labeled target were one and the same. More impressive than that, however, was the fact that the little target box had multiple appendages, each pointing off in the direction of all the maneuvers I could use to escape him. If I jinked right, he could pull me back into his targeting box. If I combined 2 moves or 3, appendages flowed away from the eliminated options and grew up to choke off new avenues of escape. His mind worked like the legendary Mon Calamari demon squid, lashing me with arm after arm that sought to drag me back into the place where he could kill me. The only way to beat him was to make him the hunted. I inverted and dove, then throttled back and came up through a tight loop that should have dropped me on his tail. He'd anticipated me, so he rolled out to port, and I rolled right after him. I throttled back up and closed faster than I should have been able to, so I clipped off a shot that missed wide to port, then snap rolled up on my port side and hauled the stick back. I held the climb for 3 seconds, then inverted and continued it into a loop. Tycho's X-Wing shot back across the front of my clutch, but I had no chance at a shot on him. From him I gained the impression of his enlarging the boxes in which he tried to trap me. He had to deal with the added problem of being a target as well, which gave him a variety of tactics to use against me. Only a few of them worked toward getting me back into the target box myself, and I did what I could to make those choices less than desirable. Rock Lead, this is Invidious. Rendezvous with the Invidious if you want to ride home. I copy. I relayed the message through to my squadron. Kate came back. Help, Lead? Nope, I'm fine. Just get out of here. Hurry. As ordered. I rolled to starboard, then turned hard left and dialed my throttle down to tighten the turn. I applied thrust as I came out of the turn, eluding a quad laser burst from Tycho, then popped my throttle off, hit enough rudder to push me in his direction, and dropped the throttle back in. I snapped off a quick shot that laced his shields with azure lightning, then applied more rudder, inverted and dove after him. I got another shot off that hit and collapsed his aft shield. In his situation, I would have panicked, but I sensed no such thing from him. We just moved into a yet bigger box in which he twisted and tumbled his X-Wing through a series of maneuvers I couldn't have followed if I'd programmed him into my computer. Whenever he had a tactical choice, he made it in a split second, presenting himself with another choice. Branches seemed chosen at random, killing any ability to anticipate him, yet all worked back toward the targeting box. I knew better than to stick around. I pulled myself into a wide turn that headed me back toward the Invidious. The Star Destroyer started laying down a defensive pattern of fire that swept out in waves to discourage pursuit. In theory, our gunners were not shooting at the incoming fighters, but they placed their shots fairly close to discourage anyone coming after us. While the big ship's shots weren't likely to hit any of the fighters, the snubby jocks had to worry about them nonetheless, which didn't give them a free hand in tracking targets, and if an incoming pilot was good enough, he could nudge his ship into the space turbo laser fire had just passed through, letting the big ship's energy beams shield him from pursuit. Racing back through the main battlefield, I saw broken ships and EV pilots all over the place. The number of bones hanging there made the place look like a rancor lair. I saw a few clutch carcasses out there too, and a couple of the corvettes from each side, Backstab wasn't among the dead ships, which I took as a positive, relatively speaking. While the survivors were a nasty bunch of liars, murderers, pirates, and thieves, some of them had almost become friends, and I didn't want to see them dead. Suddenly, I got a sense of victory pulsing out from Tycho. I flicked my target selector with my thumb and screened targets for maximum danger. What I got were a pair of proton torpedoes fast closing with my clutch. Despite my running, Tycho had come around and gotten a target lock on me, then sent me 2 going-away presents. The torpedoes traveled considerably faster than my clutch, which was their great strength, and luckily for me, their primary weakness. I watched the range indicator on the lead missile scroll down, and as it closed to within 200 meters, I jerked my stick back, then jammed it to the left and rolled into a dive. The first missile raced past while the second rolled and corrected. I jammed my stick forward and dove, letting it slide past 2, then I smiled. The way out of this trap I learned from you, Tycho. Using my scanners, I located the first missile and locked it in as a target. I brought my clutch about, so I was headed straight for it and waited until it closed within a kilometer. I flicked my weapons over to dual lasers, dropped my crosshairs on the incoming torch, and fired twice. My first pair of bolts missed, but the second hit ripping the missile to pieces only 500 meters away. I rolled, dove, and located the second torpedo. I nailed it with my first shot, detonating it at a kilometer, then flew through the collapsing gold fireball on my long swoop toward the Invidious. I heard Tycho's voice crackle through on a widecast. Very fancy flying, Clutch. Didn't want you to think I was a green pilot, rogue lead. Another time. I put my clutch into a quick weave, then darted in under the umbrella of the Invidious's fire, and landed the tri-fighter in the middle of the group area the survivors had been given. I noticed, as I brought the fighter around so the front was pointed toward the egress hatchway, that the survivors had only lost 6 of 36 clutches, and I'd only lost 2. The Imp Clutch group had lost over a dozen of their tri-fighters, and the front rank of their lead squadron, spaces reserved for their commanding officers, appeared empty. After taking a deep breath, I removed my helmet and enviro gear. Then I popped the hatch and climbed out of the clutch. Timser and Kate helped me down to the deck and supported me as my legs gave way. It took a moment for me to realize how weak I felt. Flying against Tycho had probably been the most difficult thing I'd ever done, and I had an edge in the Force. What he did, what Wedge did, without being able to use the Force made them far more special than any Jedi. They flew with heart and brains in their entire being. Timser hauled me to my feet. Very sharp what you did out there, Jen. Shooting the torps. That showed them. A warning klaxon sounded and red lights started flashing in the hangar deck. I reached back and braced myself against the clutch as the Invidious accelerated to light speed. The ship's gravity generators canceled the physical effects of speeding up, but watching the stars whiz by through the egress port was enough to disorient me. Kate fastened on her hooded cloak and pulled the hood up, then removed her heavy goggles. We did well. Bolt lost only 1. Hawk lost 3. Who did we lose? 5 and 7, Timser shrugged. They decided to tangle with some Slims, and the A-Wings vaped them. I shook my head. That was a waste. Slims were running against the backstab. Luke and Yander thought they would win points with Captain Niv. Timser brushed a hand back and forth through her spiky hair, making it stand up and spraying me with some sweat. You okay now, Cap? I straightened up. Better. Easy to forget how draining that can be. Why did you tag pointers? They came after me, Kate. Timser nailed the 1. Thanks for the assist. Just as soon keep you alive, Cap. The tall woman gave me an easy smile. Of course, the way you fly, not really a problem. Another klaxon blatted harshly, then a heavy male voice blared through the hangar via the intercom. Attention, Admiral on deck. The click of boots on decking accompanied us as we rushed forward and lined up in front of the squadron assembly area. Across from us, the Imperial squadron similarly lined up. They all looked rather smart in their black uniforms, while we looked like a fairly ragged crew. Some of us had survivor uniforms, full of golden stitchery with the gray and red, but most of us wore a motley mix of things we'd taken from planets we raided or units we'd deserted from in the past. The squadrons looked the apex and nadir, with our only advantage being the more of us had survived the battle. The central turbolift shaft opened, and 2 stormtroopers stepped forth in armor so bright that I almost asked Kate for her goggles. They paused, then split apart, each taking a step to the side, which allowed Admiral Tavira to emerge onto the deck. The stormtroopers, both the ones flanking her and the two who exited the turbolift to stand behind her, all dwarfed her physically, but something in the way she moved made her seem far from diminutive. She wore a gray admiral's uniform and held a quirt clutched at the small of her back. Even as far away as I was, I could feel the electricity in her amethyst gaze. She looked at her people, then over at us. She gestured casually with her black-gloved right hand, pointing the quirt at us. The stormtroopers led the way, her casual gait in sharp contrast with their precise and measured steps. As she neared us and began to walk down the line, her hands came out from behind her back, her quirt playing against the palm of her left hand or tapping teasingly and gently against her own chin. I kept my face impassive as she walked past me, fighting against any reaction as she flicked a quick glance in my direction. She surrendered a good 10 centimeters to me in height, and her void black hair shimmered with silvery highlights. Her pale flesh had been drawn taut over fine bones, with no lines yet begun at the corners of her eyes or mouth. In form and age she almost seemed a child, but the cool confidence of her tread and the way she measured all of us with a momentary peek betrayed kilobytes of data about her mental age. She stopped before Captain Gert and flicked the quirt against Tyresi's shoulder. "You were the one who relayed to us the plan of engagement, were you not?" "I was, Admiral." Tyresi kept her voice even, but I caught the hint of a tremble in it. Tavira studied her face for a moment, letting the silence linger to the point where it became a bit uncomfortable. "You advised a withdrawal while leaving the Rep's people to rescue." "I did, Admiral." Again the silence dragged, both Tavira and Tyresi remaining stock still. I could feel the pressure building. The strategy for which Tyresi was being blamed was mine, and any punishment she got for it should have been mine. I drew in a breath and would have said something, but I caught the barest contraction of flesh around the corner of Tavira's mouth. "That was a winning strategy, Captain Gert." Tavira pointed almost carelessly toward her own pilots. "Colonel Lamnair disagreed with it and went directly for the X-Wings. You notice he is not here to defend his decision." "No, Admiral, he is not." The quirt again tapped Tyresi's shoulder, "which means I need to replace him. I will have you in his place, Colonel Gert." Tyresi's dark eyes widened. "Me, moving to the Invidious?" "I'm certain Captain Niv will agree to the change." "Yes, Admiral." Tyresi frowned. "I would be amiss, Admiral, if I did not tell you that the strategy I relayed to you came from Captain Adanian. He suggested it. I thought it was sound and passed it up to you." "Yes," Tavira purred. "Captain Adanian, the one who killed the proton torpedoes aimed at my ship." Weren't they aimed at Corrin, not her ship? "I was thinking to have him as your replacement in Bolt Squadron." Remart shook his head, and Tavira oriented on him like a hawk bat on a granite slug. "You have something to offer, pilot?" "Begging your pardon, Admiral, but that is not how officers are selected among the survivors." "Oh, and what is the process?" Remart smiled charmingly. "First, someone has to be voted into Bolt Squadron, because we're an elite squadron." Tavira nodded. "He would be elected by his own people to fill this slot?" Remart aped her nod. "Yes, Admiral." With the quirt pressed thoughtfully against her lips, Tavira rotated and looked at my squadron. "All those in favor of Captain Adanian joining Bolt Squadron, please raise a convenient appendage." 9 hands rose down along the line. Mine did not. Tavira frowned. "You oppose your election?" "I have responsibilities to my people. You have responsibilities to me. I want you in Bolt Squadron." "As ordered, Admiral." She glanced at Remart. "Now you would tell me that he must be elected the leader of Bolt Squadron, yes?" "That is the way it is done, Admiral." Tavira's smile blossomed full of teeth. "And the position of commander of this squadron is one you covet for yourself, yes?" Remart's whole body stiffened. "I would be your most faithful and fierce servant, Admiral." Tavira slapped the quirt not so gently against Remart's stomach. "And yet you might be, but I don't want you commanding the bolts. The pressures of command might wrinkle that brow, and I would not like to see that happen to you. All those in Bolt Squadron in favor of Captain Adanian assuming command, please raise an appendage." 9 hands went up, and after a quick, curt lash, Remart's hand joined them. Tavira smiled graciously. "Though I despise democracy, it is nice to see this quaint custom result in I've never heard the word unanimous with ity at the end of it. Unanimity. I don't know how to pronounce that word. The vote was unanimous, in other words. Totally. Congratulations, Captain Adanian. You have a new command. You now can relay your plans directly to the Invidious. It is a privilege I will be careful in exercising, Admiral. Her violet eyes narrowed. Why do I have the feeling that I may have just made the mistake in having you elevated? I kept my expression open. I have no idea, Admiral. See to it, Captain Adanian, that you give me no reason to think on it again. As ordered, Admiral. I bowed my head toward her and did not lift it again until she and her entourage had clomped away with Tyresi to introduce her to her new command. I shot a glance at Remart and saw him tremble with anger. I gave her no reason to think she'd made a mistake. Remart, on the other hand, most certainly would. Because of that, I knew then that when our inevitable confrontation came, only one of us would walk away. Chapter 38. Taking over Bolt Squadron for Tyresi Gert proved both more and less difficult than I would have thought. Jacob Niv approved of the choice, which cut the resentment of some of the Bolts. Most of them waited to see how well I could fly, and while the sensor data from the flight against Tycho and shooting the torpedoes down certainly convinced most, a few holdouts waited until we had a chance to practice against each other. Remart and two others, with the other replacement pilot from Slash Squadron soon joining them, staunchly opposed me. I gathered them into three flight and couldn't wait until I could toss them at Rogue Squadron or Pash Kraken's A-Wing group. I knew that was a decidedly un-Jedi-like desire on my part and felt uneasy about it, but having Remart scheming away about getting me in trouble added stress I didn't need to my life. Fortunately for him and me, the Invidious didn't call on anyone for missions for over a month, leaving us to languish on Corcus. We all assumed it was taking that long for Tyresi to get the Invidious' fighter group back together. Invidious' lack of action didn't prevent Admiral Tavira from showing up on Corcus for meetings with the various gang leaders from time to time, though no missions from those meetings passed down to me. Aside from working with my new squadron, I used the downtime to go over the various events of the Jaffel raid. We learned later through various channels that the New Republic had not been at Jaffel waiting for us. The New Republic had staged a surprise raid on Jaffel to trap officials of Kuat Drive Yards. KDY had been under various judicial orders to stop polluting the planet and start massive cleanup campaigns, but had done almost nothing to comply. During the Thrawn raids, little had been done to enforce the rulings. Ditto the turmoil concerning the reborn Emperor. KDY had gotten complacent, so the New Republic stepped in, used an interdictor to keep all ships in the system, and were in the process of checking everything out when we showed up. While I was happy to see Jaffel on the way to getting cleaned up, the nature of the raid and our stumbling into it took on a greater significance for me. Tavira's people missed the New Republic forces because those forces were not there to trap the Invidious. Those forces had a different target. This meant that Tavira's advisors were able to read threats directed toward her, not the future in general. They were sensing the same hostile intent I'd gotten from Tycho, only they got their warning a bit in advance. Unless something was a direct threat to Tavira and the Invidious, and by extension the advisor himself, it just didn't register. As good as they might be at using the Force, they seemed limited, half-trained. My fruitless consideration of how to use this discovery against Tavira occupied a lot of my free time, and it wasn't a problem I could share with my friends. It got knocked offline one afternoon when Jacob Niv called me into his office. I knew the pilots who had been at Jaffel had been being called into their various headquarters to answer questions about the battle, but the process had left the survivors for last. The pilots in the other bands remained quiet about what went on in the interrogations, but I gathered none of them really had a clue about what happened to them. I entered the office, tossed Captain Niv and Admiral Tavira a salute, then moved to third chair in the set before Niv's desk, the one with its back to the door in a connecting office. Admiral Tavira, wearing a pilot's black jumpsuit with a short jacket and cape to match, crossed her legs and let her booted left foot bounce somewhat impatiently. "Thank you for joining us, Captain Adanian." I nodded once. "My pleasure, Admiral. How can I be of service?" I am making inquiries about the Jaffel battle. As you are aware, in the past my advisors have been rather shrewd about keeping the invidious out of danger. Tavira regarded me through half-lidded eyes, beguiling eyes. At Jaffel they failed, but there they sensed a presence. A presence, I frowned. I'm not certain I understand. Do you know what a Jedi Knight is? Her question came soft and almost seductive. The pink tip of her tongue wet her lips as she waited for my reply, her gaze gaining in intensity. Her manner and bearing and tone of voice suggested rewards for the truth, and I found myself surprisingly willing to indulge her. Exar Kun's promise to let me have her flashed through my mind, followed quickly by the image of Mirax, sending a little jolt through me. In the wake of that jolt, I felt a presence creeping into my mind. It came tentatively and gently, a roly-poly lint nerf rolling and hopping over the surface of my consciousness. Had I not been trained in the ways of the Force, I never would have noticed it, or would have put it down to the Admiral's penetrating gaze. As it was, even with my rudimentary skill in the Force, I felt its intrusion and sought to deflect it away from any deep probe. I recalled how Luke had entered my mind by making his thoughts flow along with mine. I reversed this technique. Since the prober was looking for information about the Force and Jedi Knights, I'd supply it. I dredged up every memory of Jedi Knights from every trashy holodrama and news documentary I could remember. I created a pool of such images, allowing the prober in, then insisting her in the wealth of data. I do, Admiral. I blushed and glanced down. I used to be quite a fanatic on the subject as a child. I watched whatever I could because it infuriated my family. I didn't understand then the risk to my family I posed, nor the risk that Jedi posed to the Empire. I know the New Republic claims to have some, and I believe one of them was responsible for the destruction of Corrida. So he was. Tavira's eyes brightened slightly. At the Battle of Jafel, my people had indications of the presence of a Jedi. Do you know anything about that? I threw my head back and laughed. It all makes sense now. She frowned. What does? The proton torpedoes. Those would be what he used against the Invidious. Niv shook her head, again with help files. I looked openly at the both of them, feeding shock into the pool of memories in my brain. The Jedi, Luke Starkiller, Adam Darklighter, Big Skywalker, whatever. The one who destroyed the Death Star at Yavin. He used proton torpedoes. It makes sense that he shot them at your ship when going away. I was flying against Rogue Squadron, and he was the founder of Rogue Squadron after all. I felt the same surprise on Tavira's face roll down the connection in my brain. That presence withdrew itself as Tavira's surprise melted into an appreciative smile. I am impressed, Captain Adanian. No one else has connected Rogue Squadron with the Jedi. Not even your advisors? No, not even them. Her Kurt cracked against her gloved palm. How is it that you were able to come up with this answer? I narrowed my eyes. That X-Wing pilot almost got me. I knew he was from Rogue Squadron, but when analyzing my performance after the fact, I realized I needed to know more about all of them. Their history makes for fascinating reading. You're even mentioned in it. Her head came up and her gaze became icy. I've run afoul of them several times, but never with a Jedi flying with them. I tried, but could not suppress a shiver. She caught it and smiled. You've survived an encounter with them, as have I. Does that make us kindred spirits? It makes us both survivors. And you take pride in being a survivor? I shook my head. I take pride in being a victor. Her eyes widened slightly. And do you always win? So far. Perhaps you have not been properly challenged. She pursed her lips for a moment. Perhaps I should find a challenge for you. Captain Niv shifted uneasily in his chair. If you wish, I can... I held a hand up. Begging your pardon, sir. May I speak frankly, Admiral? Tavira blinked at me. This is different. Proceed. I stood. I have great respect for you, Admiral, as a tactician and for being able to hold together this coalition. Your ability to keep the Invidious intact while the New Republic is hunting her is nothing short of miraculous. And without meaning to sound forward, I think you're stunningly beautiful. Fact is, though, I joined the Invids to be a pilot and to make money. If the challenge you're thinking of offering me tests my pilot skills, I'm your man. If not, I'm not interested in the job. Niv looked stricken, and I'm pretty certain he thought he was going to be ordered to have me killed right then and there. Tavira looked surprised for all of a second. Then she rose to her feet and lashed me across the face with the Curt. Okay, what is a Curt? I'll have to look this up later. Q-U-I-R-T. I've been pronouncing it Curt. It sounds like it's some sort of scepter that she's, or stick, something that she's holding and all the time. I don't know what it is. I knew the stinging blow was coming. No need even for the Force to tell me that, and I just took it. The pain sank into my flesh, and heat rose to replace it in my right cheek. I didn't feel any trickle of blood, but I knew I'd have a nasty welt for a day or so, and an ugly bruise after that. That is for your presumption, Captain. Tavira brought the Curt back and pressed it up under my chin. If I were to find you attractive, and though you are far from ugly, you are not of a type I favor, and I wanted you to attend me, you would. No speaking here. Know that what I tell you is fact, pure and simple. Her eyes all but closed as she stared up at my face. Pity you're so very blonde. I've always found blondes to be a disaster for me. She spun away abruptly, letting the Curt rasp against my throat. As for pilot challenges, those I will present to you. Within a week, I think, I will have the survivors spearhead an action for me. Do you think you'll be up to that challenge? I will do as ordered, Admiral. Tavira turned back toward me slowly, with a coy smile on her face. I imagine you will, Captain, which means there is hope for you of a future. Do not displease me, Captain. You won't like what happens to those in whom I am displeased. I retreated from Niv's office, passing Timsur, who was waiting to go in next, and walked out into the sunlight. I started to head toward a little restaurant I liked, but as I started thinking, my wandering became aimless. So many things had happened in that meeting that I needed to sort them out and figure out how to proceed. First and foremost, I had confirmed what I suspected. Tavira's advisors were Force-sensitive and schooled in some use of the Force. I was pretty sure my deflection had gone unnoticed, which meant her advisors were not very skilled in that sort of probing. It could have been that their talent for uncovering threats was a passive one, working only on threats directed at them. That meant they were largely reactive, which was akin to being a counterpuncher as a fighter. It's not bad, but it means you have to get hit first before you can hit back. The fact that they had detected my Force use in the battle did disturb me, and made me thankful I'd been working to keep my Force sensitivity shielded otherwise. If Luke's early assumption that Mirax had been taken to forestall action on my part were true, because my Force presence could identify me, I'd all but announced to my enemies that I was there, that I was here. The fact that they were willing to accept the Force presence of the battle as that of Luke Skywalker didn't clear this problem up. It just meant they had no way to differentiate me from Luke for the moment. It also struck me as odd that I never had a sense of Tavira's advisors before the probe in the office, or during the battle. If they could detect me, they were within my range to detect them, or so it would seem. They had to be shielding themselves as well, remaining hidden. Given that until a half-dozen years before, being a Jedi was a quick way to slow death, the ability to remain hidden was a virtue. For me, however, this virtue meant I could be standing right next to a dangerous enemy and not know it. Second, and equally important, I'd learned Tavira did not like being crossed. I blunted the prelude to her proposition. She punished me for it, then told me I'd never defy her again. She did not admit I'd headed her off, and she did not relinquish control in the situation. She clearly felt she had come out the victor, and I didn't want to know how she was going to reinforce her victory. I found myself before the crash and descended into the cool depths. I gave my eyes a chance to adjust to the dim light, then made my way toward the back to a table where Timsur sat with Kate. Before I could get there, however, Remart landed a hand heavily on my left shoulder. I turned toward him, shrugging his hand off. You want something? The big man smiled slyly at me. Just to buy you a drink. Got a special on Allion neurotoxins, do they? The bartender, a guy who had enough sores on his face to be from Jaffel, laughed. We're not Margaths. Sasriu is buying. What do you have? Local Laman ale, thanks. I looked at Remart. Why so generous? I don't want any misunderstandings between us, Captain. He raised a scarlet brandy in my direction as a salute. No hard feelings. Sure, I accepted the ale from the bartender, nodded at Remart, then continued on my way to the back. Timser slid a chair out with her foot for me. What's going on with Remart? Timser snorted and Kate growled. Sasru came into Niv's office after me to meet with the Admiral and Captain Niv. Came out of the meeting all happy. Seems the Admiral thinks she's going to let Remart show her a good time after our next outing. Oh, I sipped some of the ale and let the carbonation attack my tongue. The ale soured in my mouth, but I knew it wasn't anything to do with the brewing. I didn't like the idea of Remart with Admiral Tavira, and turned to glower at him. Kate let a low growl roll from her throat. Jealousy does not suit you, Genos. I looked at her, blinking in surprise. Jealous? Me? Of Remart? No way. Timser shook her head. Got it bad, pretty clearly, Jen. No, you're wrong. I frowned at the both of them, then drank. I tried to tell myself I didn't like the idea of them being together because Remart would cause trouble for me with Tavira. With Tavira backing him, Remart will be a terror. Timser gave me an exaggerated nod. I copy, Captain Adanian, but I think your sensor data is reading wrong. Kate agreed with a smile. Seek the truth, Genos. Don't fly blind. My frown deepened as I considered the possibility of being jealous. I knew it was insane. I didn't want her. I had Mirex and I was very happy. I'd refused her, and I could easily see her turning to Remart as both a way to salve her ego and to get under my skin, since our dislike for each other was well known. Yet even though I didn't want her, I wanted her to be with him even less. I am jealous. I shivered. Part of me knew my jealousy was all pre-programmed and genetic. By winning a female, a man guaranteed his own genetic survival, and all other men are de facto rivals in that quest for immortality. As much as I wanted to believe I was removed from my animal nature, as much as I clung to Yoda's dictum that we are not crude creatures of matter, I still didn't like Remart. I also had a powerful attraction to Leonia Tavira. I had to admit it. Part of the reason I'd cut her proposition short was because I did find her desirable. She was easily classed as eye candy, and her cunning enhanced her attractiveness. Her capriciousness was dangerous, but that very danger was a challenge. Could I, in relating with her more closely, avoid her wrath? Before letting myself follow that line of thought, I pressed my mug of cold ale up against my right cheek and let the chill soothe the fire there. I felt more of a sting as some of the ale slopped down over the abraded flesh, but I let it remind me of Tavira's petty and venial side. Am I so far gone here that I truly want her? It drove a sting like a vibro blade into any desire I had for her. I hoped it had left a mortal wound, but I wasn't sure of it. Kate sniffed once in my direction. Your face. Who? I lowered the ale and gave her a good view of the welt. Remart's playmate. She didn't like my answer to some of her questions. Timser swirled brandy around in a snifter, then smiled. I answered them and all I got was a headache. Yeah, well, I told her I had a headache and got lashed for it. Not wise, Kate leaned forward. No pity for Remart. For you, fear. Don't fear for me, Kate. I shook my head, and don't do it around Tavira. I think she can smell fear and can smell weakness. Stink of either one around her, and you might as well chew a blaster bolt. It'll be quicker, and just might not hurt as much. End of chapter 38. Well, that's it for today. See you next time for more of I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole.